Hello and welcome to this edition of Piedmont Business Live. I'm your host, Ken Morrison. Today we're talking to Mack Arrington, who is a business coach. Am I correct in saying that?
Oh, professional coach. Professional. Yeah, I do executive and life coaching.
Okay. Why do people need a coach?
Well, the easy answer is because there's a lot of overwhelm these days. People are dealing with change. Some people are getting stuck where they are. And you need an outside perspective. As Bill Gates says, everybody needs a coach because you cannot see yourself.
That's true.
Actors need a coach. Sports players need a coach. It's because you can't see yourself. You need an outside perspective. You need somebody who can ask you the honest questions and give you an honest response. And as part of that dialogue, you need somebody who can help you plan, because if you've been doing the same job for roughly 2 years, your brain hardwires that into place. And it becomes hard to think outside of your own addictions the way that your brain is hardwired. Your brain will actually ambush you. And so a coach can help you get beyond that.
And it's not just telling somebody what they want to hear. It's sometimes telling them what they don't want to hear, but what they have to hear, I would assume.
There is that honesty that goes with that. In professional coaching, we say that we owe the clients the inklings and thoughts that we have, and they are free to tell us that we are wrong with that, but that usually leads to an even more engaging conversation.
Now, I notice you have an international certification. Tell me, why is that?
Well, when I started coaching, I wanted to be a professional. And one of the things that I noticed is that you have a lot of companies that certify their own coaches. You have a lot of people out there who are claiming to be coaches, but they've never had any coach-specific training. And I wanted to have a higher standard that I believe comes with having an independent third-party certification. And the International Coach Federation was one of the first, if not the first, international, globally oriented coach credentialing bodies. And when you've got that ICF certification, it really does mean something. For my requirements to get the PCC, the Professional Coach Certification, I had to have a minimum of 125 hours of coach-specific training. I had to have at least 500 hours of client coaching experience that was verifiable. I had to have a mentor coach, and I had to pass a live coaching evaluation with 2 master coaches.
Wow.
Not everybody that has a coach after their name has had to go to that extent to certify themselves, to be able to step up and say, I have paid my dues, and I wanted to be able to do that.
Okay. Now, you've been an executive and life coach since 2001, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So how did you decide to go into coaching?
I was not being the greatest employee everywhere I went. A lot of the companies I worked for were entrepreneurial companies, and they had growing pains, and most of them have gone out of business. I actually worked for a major corporation, and in the merger, they eliminated our department. And after that type of experience, I talked it over with my wife, and I discovered coaching. And I realized that I had 5 requirements that were very important to me. And coaching offered me the opportunity to meet all 5 of those requirements. Would you like to know what they were?
Please.
Well, first, I wanted to help people. That's part of where my heart is. Second, I wanted to make a decent living. Third, I wanted to control my schedule. Fourth, I wanted to be a good daddy and husband. And fifth, I wanted to be able to do all of that in the context of my faith in Christ. And that's part of who I am. So coach, as a profession, has allowed me to do all of that and even more. And it's again, been very rewarding to actually be able to pour myself into other people's lives and see the changes that they've been able to make to define and to achieve their own success.
And as you're mentioning those 5 things, what came to mind for me was balance. It really gives a sense of great balance, because if you're great at work, but at home you're just not the best father or husband or both that you can be, it's your life's just not where it should be or could be.
I could tell you stories. I had one client who he was a highly paid salesperson, and he was never home. His complaint was, whenever I go home, the dogs bark at me like I'm a stranger in my own house. We were able to address that.
That's terrific. So how did you decide to focus on executive and life coaching?
Good question. I believe that leadership is critical today. We live in a transformational time that could be very dangerous. We see economic problems everywhere. We see social problems everywhere. And leaders are continually being confronted with things that they've never seen before. They get blindsided. There's a sense of, well, how do we prepare for what's coming when the future is so fluid? And what I'm finding is that people in leadership, they need that outside perspective. And they suffer from the same imbalances that, quote, normal people do. We tend to separate our personal life and our business life, and then we become fragmented, and we don't put that back together. Well, it's not just your business life or your personal life, it's your life.
Right.
And when you put the pieces back together, if you have challenges in one part, it's going to impact the other part at some point. Your dogs may not know you when you come home, but you're a top-notch salesman. Well, what's wrong with that picture? And so I have yet to work with any executive who at some point did not step over from the executive coaching into the life area and need some type of exploration and goal setting to get his life together and put that back into balance.
Well, it makes sense, because I can't think of a situation where you would have somebody whose professional life is 100% separated from their personal life. I don't see how they could be totally separate.
I was working with a fellow once, and after you've worked with someone for a while, you tend to start having fun with each other. And this one guy had a contractor who was supposed to add on to his home. And then all of a sudden the contractor stopped showing up and wouldn't return calls. And then he noticed that the foundation of the new addition was pulling away from the house. Oh, no. And so every day when he went to work, he pulled out of his driveway and he saw the addition not finished. And every day when he came home from work, he saw the addition not finished. And it was driving him nuts that the contractor wouldn't call him back, and it was such a frustration. It was bothering him at work. It was impacting his productivity. And I remember I listened to that and I said, well, why don't you just get another contractor to come in and fix that? And then there's this long silence. And you can tell when you've asked the right question because there's a long silence. Yeah. And he says, I think I need to do that. And just sue the original contractor, which all it took was asking for me what was sort of that obvious curiosity question, and it allowed him to shift into what he really needed to do.
Yeah. So if I were to hire you as my coach, how would we work together? How does the process work?
There are a couple of things that we would want to do at the start. Normally, I would send you an email with some startup questions, and we want to take a look at 4 areas in the process of coaching. First is we want to take a look at your goals, because as soon as you get clear on your goals, you start making better decisions. If we're working with you and your company, I like to have the input for what the company goals are for you. And then the HR guy steps out of the room and you and I have a conversation about, well, what are your personal goals? What do you want to get out of the coaching relationship. And then we execute on both of those levels. Second part is we take a look at your tolerations. What are you tolerating? What are you putting up with? What wastes your time, your money, your energy? What scatters you? What distracts you? And we try to eliminate what you tolerate, because the more we can eliminate, the more time and energy and resources you have to focus on the things that are going to bring you success and a sense of fulfillment. Years ago, there was some research out saying that the average executive wastes 40 minutes a day looking for something that he had a few minutes ago. Well, now think of this. 10 minutes a day spread out through the year is a 40-hour work week. So if I can save you 10 minutes a day on the average work day, we have leveraged you an extra week out of the year to work on things that bring you a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. How does that sound?
I'm all in. On your website, I see that you do personality testing. So tell me what this does for people.
Sure. The personality test package that I use is amazingly accurate.
Yeah.
There are 3 parts. One of the most important parts gives us the indication of the 2 or maybe 3 primary areas in your life that you must satisfy for a sense of personal success and fulfillment. So once we know what those 2 things are, it gives you an area of focus, and it also allows you to eliminate some of the fluff in your life. The second part identifies various attributes that you may or may not have developed. And those can be attributes that indicate your strengths, and those can be attributes that perhaps you will need to develop before you can really move on with your life and your career. It also indicates a sense of where your balance is or is not, and that can be very handy too. And then the third part is a behavioral communication part that indicates where you might fit in terms of culture or behavior, what your behavioral strengths are. So once we put the whole thing together, we find out what you do, why you do, and how you do. And it gives a more complete picture of who you are. And like I say, once we have that, you cannot hide from either of us. It gets to be comical at times, because when some of my clients are struggling with a business challenge or a personal challenge, I am able to refer back to their personality profile, if you want to call it that. We call it assessments, but most people call them personality profiles. And it's a learning process, because once you know that part of yourself, again, you're less likely to ambush your own efforts.
I imagine that after people take the personality test, many of them are very surprised at the results, thinking they would show one thing, but it shows something different. Am I right on that?
Let me put it this way. When people ask me if this is true, I say, well, go check it out with your spouse or your significant other, and that's the clincher right there. It's kind of funny the way that works, but it gets verified better than 90% of the time.
Well, can you give me some examples of maybe some of your successful clients, not necessarily mentioning by name, but,
Sure.
but how your services have benefited them?
That's a great question. Everybody's a little bit different. One that comes to mind was an executive who had to put together a team and spent 3 years creating a new product for his company. And they were getting ready to launch the product, and they called him in and said, the company has decided to take a different direction, and we're not going to do the product. And he felt that he had just wasted 3 years of his career for nothing. And it really threw the band into a tailspin. Here you had a top flight executive, very focused, very productive, very dedicated to the company, and it's like they pulled the rug out from under him. We worked together for about 6 months, and about halfway through that, he was really in a restorative mode. He was rebalancing his life, he was taking control, he was dealing with his anger and his disappointment, and at the end of the 6 months, he was back to basically full productivity and contribution to the company. As a matter of fact, he continued with me as his coach for 7 years.
Wow.
And we worked through family challenges, through job challenges, job transitions, through mergers and acquisitions. A lot happened in that 7 years. And more than once, I was able to ask him sort of that dumb curiosity question that allowed him to shift his perspective and be prepared for what he was about to have to face.
Good.
Yes.
Now, you've co-authored a series on master transformational coaching, and this is training people for future thinking and action.
Yes.
Exactly does that mean?
The best example I can think of it began with the internet in 1969, and I'm not going to talk about who may or may not have invented the internet.
We just know it's there.
It's there. But the internet was created in 1969. 20 years later, the World Wide Web was built into the internet.
Right.
Now, when it was first created, it's what we would call a weak signal, and weak signals are all around us. Mm-hmm. Some of those weak signals will trend up, and some will fad out. The internet trended up. So in 1989, the World Wide Web was built into that internet, making it a complex adaptive system with multiple access points and organic growth into a disruptive innovation that we all rely on today.
That's a mouthful.
Oh, it is. It is. And this is what's happening today. We are having to prepare our leaders for a future that is emerging but does not fully exist yet. How do you prepare for that? If you were a strategic planner in 1988 and the World Wide Web debuted in 1989, how would you have done a strategic plan without that knowledge, without knowing what was coming the next year? The challenge that we have with all of our systems is that things are changing so fast. Leaders are having to prepare for things that they don't even know exist yet. And people are having to adjust all the way down the line. You know, when you're dealing with a transformational time, it can be a very edgy and disruptive thing. And that's what I see everywhere I look these days. How do you prepare a leader to think outside of that box? How do you point out to the leader that maybe there never was a box to start with? Mm-hmm. And in the transformational sense, everything is connected. You can't poke something over here without something else popping up over there.
Right.
And we have to start thinking in terms of the bigger system. And transformational coaching, becoming a master transformational coach, aims to develop leaders who do that naturally. Rick Smyer, who was my co-author there, used to be CEO of a textile plant. And he says that whenever they used to have a problem, they would call everybody in the leadership team in a room, and they assumed that somebody in the room had the answer. And he said, today, that is a deadly assumption. You have to go beyond who and whatever is in the room because it's all connected, and we have to deal with those connections, or those connections will deal with us.
It seems to me that change today in this era is far more rapid and widespread than it ever has been in decades past.
Oh, exactly, exactly. The thing I like to point out is that by the time you can finish asking the question, the answer is already changed.
Yeah. I know, it's amazing. The access to information that people have and new technologies being developed, I imagine it takes a lot more of this transformational thinking to keep up.
Oh, and we tend to get ambushed by the patterns that we already have established. In the industrial age that is now gone by, we developed what was called traditional thinking. You get cause, effect, and everything lines up.
Right.
Well, with transformational thinking, nothing particularly lines up. Everything kind of falls in at the same time. And if you're not careful, you're going to be juggling instead of balancing. I would much rather coach you to balance than to have to watch you juggle the whole time.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I understand you have a simple way of explaining how coaching is different from other helping professions. So tell me how.
Would you like to know the simple example that I give?
Please.
Okay, here it goes. Most everybody I work with wants to climb their ladder of success. Most people want to define success in their own terms. And so when we look at the different helping professions, a consultant will search the world over to find the perfect ladder for you. They may even bring this ladder and say, here's your ladder, Ken, climb this one. Mm-hmm. A trainer will come to you and say, okay, Ken, you got the ladder. I am the expert trainer for this ladder. Let me show you how to do this with the most efficiency and effectiveness with this Model A33 ladder.
Right.
The mentor comes to you and says, you know, my ladder of success looked a lot like your ladder of success. Would you like me to give you some tips on how I climbed my ladder? Well, of course. And then the therapist comes and looks at you and says, Ken, why aren't you climbing your ladder? What's blocking you from making your progress? The coach, on the other hand, brings his own ladder, puts his ladder up next to yours, and climbs with you rung by rung and asks you all the obvious curiosity questions. Are you climbing too fast? Are you climbing too slow? Do you like the color of your ladder? And is there some point where you might want to change ladders? And as a coach, that's what I like to see myself doing. I climb with you for as long as you need that type of support, that type of perspective.
Makes perfect sense. That's an excellent illustration.
Well, thank you.
Well, if you'd like to know more about Mack Arrington and how he might be able to help you, please visit his website. It'll be at the end of this video. It's also at the bottom of this page. Mack, thanks so much for being with us, and we wish you great success.
Well, this has been great. Thank you very much, too.
Thank you for tuning in to Piedmont Business Live. We'll see you again next time.